What if humanity's last hope rested in the hands of a single, broken soul? What if survival didn't mean victory, but the courage to face an empire that has crushed every resistance in its path? In a universe torn apart by the ruthless reign of an alien empire, Earth's final defenders are scattered across the vast, cold void of space. But all is not lost. This is the story of their fight, not just for survival, but for revenge, transformation, and the freedom that was stolen from them. The journey begins in a desolate outpost on the edge of the galaxy, where the last remnants of humanity face a stark choice: surrender or continue the fight, knowing the cost may be their very existence. The human spirit, tested by countless battles, now hangs by a thread, but a new hope arises. A broken warrior, once a leader, is forced into a new role, one that will take everything they have and more. What they don't know is that their actions will trigger a revolution that will forever change the fate of the galaxy. The conflict intensifies. A plan, born of desperation and vengeance, takes shape. Old alliances crumble, and new enemies emerge, threatening to obliterate all that remains of human civilization. Betrayal lurks around every corner, as individuals grapple with their own motivations, some driven by hatred, others by the need to redeem themselves. As the stakes rise, so too does the tension between those who are willing to risk everything and those who would sacrifice anything to hold on to power. Can humanity's final stand against an empire of unparalleled force succeed, or will they be lost in the darkness forever, the soul of a species pushed to the brink of extinction? Themes of survival, revenge, and transformation. Survival, humanity's last hope, is fragile, clinging to the edge of existence, forcing us to ask, how far will we go to preserve our future? Revenge, the story unfolds as individuals and nations seek retribution for the horrors inflicted upon them, testing what it means to fight for justice when all seems lost. Transformation, what happens to a person when they are pushed beyond their limits? And can a broken society ever rebuild itself from the ashes? Stay tuned, because what comes next will determine if humanity's spirit will be forever extinguished, or if the fight for freedom can ignite a fire that will consume the oppressors. The void stretches out in every direction, an endless sea of cold, inky blackness. No stars twinkle in this corner of the galaxy, only the cold expanse of nothingness, interrupted only by the occasional flicker of dying lights from distant outposts. In this vast, silent abyss, the remnants of humanity cling to the edge of survival. Above a barren planet, the once thriving cradle of Earth, the silence is broken by the hum of machines, barely functional, but still holding on. The atmosphere is thick with ash, a testament to the wars fought long ago. The ground below is cracked, scarred by the fallout of battles that have long since faded into the pages of history. Cities once teeming with life now lie in ruins, their skeletons poking through the cracked earth like forgotten tombstones. The air smells faintly of metal and decay, tinged with the sharp stench of ozone. Once blue skies have turned a dull, sickly orange, streaked with smoke from the last remnants of human industry. It's a world on the brink, a fragile remnant of a once great civilization, now reduced to its last breath. In orbit above this dying planet, the remnants of humanity's fleet drift aimlessly. A few scattered ships, each a patchwork of salvaged technology, are all that remain of an empire once capable of challenging even the greatest cosmic forces. But no more. The enemy has left its mark, an alien empire whose ships blot out the stars like ominous clouds, their weapons capable of wiping out entire fleets with a single strike. Here, in the silence of the void, the war is over, but the survivors are still haunted by the echoes of battle. On the bridge of a damaged command vessel, broken screens flicker with static, displaying maps of the galaxy that now seem like a distant dream. Communications are down. The command crew is gone. The ship's last remaining crew members are nothing more than a handful of ghosts, warriors too proud to surrender, too broken to fight. A faint hum vibrates through the hull, barely noticeable but ever present, as if the ship itself is holding on to life by the thinnest of threads. Outside, the cold stars blink distantly, indifferent to the lives that hang in the balance. Only the occasional thrum of a distant, passing ship stirs the stillness, an unwelcome reminder of the Empire's ever-present dominance. The war that once raged across planets and star systems has subsided, leaving only the quiet sorrow of defeat. Across the galaxy, ruins from battles long past stand as silent memorials to the bloodshed and loss. The surviving factions have scattered into the fringes of space, hiding, waiting for a sign, a reason to rise again. But hope is a fragile thing here, flickering in the dark like a dying flame, ready to be snuffed out at any moment. The ships drift like ghosts in the blackness, their hulls pocked with the scars of war. The sound of their engines is a low, mournful whine, an enduring reminder of a past they cannot escape. Inside their walls, the survivors linger, not in peace, but in a hollow, fragile existence. The air inside is thick with the scent of recycled oxygen, a sterile, artificial air that suffocates the soul. The clank of metal on metal echoes through the halls, adding a percussive beat to the oppressive silence that has become their only companion. Outside, the planet spins slowly in the void, a desolate, empty world that once held everything. The only sign of life is the occasional flicker of light from hidden resistance ships, their movements cautious and uncertain, as if they know they are being watched. It is not just the enemy they fear anymore. It is the weight of the past, the regret of those lost, and the knowledge that every step forward might be their last. And yet, beneath the crushing weight of despair, there remains a flicker of defiance, a desire to reclaim what was lost. But in this world, even the smallest glimmer of hope is a dangerous thing, one that could easily be extinguished by the overwhelming power of an alien force that has known no mercy. The cold, lifeless space outside the ship's hull stretches on, indifferent to the struggle within. Inside the command vessel, the tension is palpable, thick as the stale air. The ship's emergency lights flicker erratically, casting long, eerie shadows across the rusted walls. There is a sense of impending doom, an unseen weight pressing on the crew, though no one speaks of it aloud. The hum of the engines has become a steady, almost rhythmic sound, as though trying to reassure those aboard that the ship is still alive, still capable of moving forward. But deep down, everyone knows it's just a matter of time before it all falls apart. The ship's dwindling supplies are a constant reminder of their precarious existence. The food rations are low, the water purifier barely functioning, and the oxygen levels are starting to drop. The mood is a mixture of fear and resignation. The crew, once a proud force, now seems little more than survivors, a ragged group of individuals clinging to a broken dream. A voice crackles through the comms, weak and distant. It's the only communication they've received in days, a distress signal from a nearby station. The message is fragmented, filled with static, but the words that manage to break through are clear enough. It's them or we're not alone. They found us, they're coming. The transmission cuts off abruptly, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. The message, though brief, is enough to send a shiver through the remaining crew. The alien empire, long thought to be distant and unrelenting, has finally caught up with them. The first shot in this new phase of the war has been fired, and the enemy is not far behind. The captain, though a shadow of the leader they once were, stiffens at the news. Their eyes narrow, and for a moment, a spark of old resolve flickers in the depths. But it quickly fades, replaced by a grim determination. They turn to the tactical officer, their voice low and tight. Set course for the station. We can't afford to let them fall. Prepare for combat. The officer nods, but the uncertainty in their eyes betrays their words. The truth is, the ship is no longer a fighting vessel, it's a relic, a hunk of metal barely held together by desperation. Even if they manage to make it to the station, what will they find there? And how can they fight when their resources are so limited? Outside the viewport, the station looms, a once bustling hub now reduced to a flickering ghost of its former self. The lights are dim, and there's no sign of life. But something feels wrong. The air outside the station seems thick with tension, as though the very fabric of space itself is holding its breath. The ship lurches forward, engine sputtering as the crew scrambles to prepare for what's coming. Every motion, every click of buttons, feels urgent, desperate. The dread hanging in the air is suffocating. We don't have the firepower to win this, the tactical officer murmurs, scanning the rapidly approaching station. Even if we make it out alive, we'll be outgunned the moment they arrive. The captain's lips tighten, the weight of their decision pressing heavily on their shoulders. This is not just a mission, it's a gamble. A final attempt to strike back before the enemy overwhelms them entirely. But what if it's already too late? The first signs of conflict are subtle at first, glowing lights in the distance, the faint hum of a ship's engines, the way the shadows seemed to shift unnaturally across the station. The enemy is coming, and they're bringing more than just firepower. They bring a psychological edge that cuts deeper than any weapon. As the ship draws closer to the station, a sudden, sharp jolt rattles the hull, and a low, mournful alarm begins to blare. The comms crackle again, the voice that emerges garbled and filled with panic. They've breached the perimeter. It's too late. We're done. Before anyone can respond, the transmission ends. Silence once again fills the air. The reality sets in. The crew has no choice but to fight, not just for their survival, but for the survival of everyone left. The stakes have never been higher. If they fail, the Empire will claim the station, and with it, any hope for a rebellion. But even if they succeed in defending it, they know the cost will be immense. What they stand to lose is more than just lives, it's the last shred of their humanity, the last thread of hope for something beyond survival. In the dark void of space, with the looming threat of annihilation closing in, there is no room for doubt. Only one thing is certain: if humanity is to have any chance at freedom, they must rise now, before the darkness consumes them all. The station's desperate warning klaxon echoed through the hollow ship, a shrill, relentless reminder of the impending disaster. Every creak of the walls seemed amplified in the tense silence, and the flickering lights threw jagged shadows across the crew's worn faces. But nothing had prepared them for what they were about to face. As the captain stood at the helm, staring at the chaotic data flashing across the screen, their hands trembled ever so slightly. The tactical officer's words were still hanging in the air, sharp and clear. The station's gone. They've already taken it. We're too late. But it wasn't just the station that had fallen. The signal from the station's distress beacon had carried more than just coordinates, it had carried a message, one that chilled the blood of every person aboard the ship. Embedded in the broken transmission were coordinates of a hidden facility, an underground bunker, long thought abandoned. A facility that could hold the key to humanity's survival. The enemy, this merciless alien empire, had not just wiped out colonies and fleets, they had erased humanity's hope for a future. But now, in the midst of this cold, empty space, a sliver of that hope had emerged from the ruins of a shattered world. This facility, it seemed, held secrets, untold, ancient technology that could shift the balance of power. The Resistance had known of it for years, but kept its location a secret, even from their own allies, to protect it from enemy eyes. But now, the very people they had tried to protect it from had stumbled upon it. The transmission was not just a cry for help, it was a direct invitation. The enemy had found the bunker. And worse, they were preparing to harness its power for themselves. The realization struck like a punch to the gut: humanity's last chance for victory had just been handed to its greatest adversary. If they didn't act fast, the Empire would uncover the secrets within the facility, and any hope of freedom would be wiped out once and for all. The captain paced, lips tight with frustration, as the crew members scrambled to make sense of the rapidly evolving situation. Outside the viewport, the station, once a beacon of humanity's progress, now floated lifeless in space. A dozen or more enemy ships were visible on the far side, their hulking forms dark against the backdrop of distant stars. They were already preparing to secure the bunker, or worse, begin the process of scuttling it entirely. The captain's mind raced. Time was slipping away. A choice had to be made. "We can't just let them take it," the tactical officer said, breaking the silence. "If they get access to that technology, everything we fought for, it's over." The urgency in the officer's voice was unmistakable, but it was the captain's expression, narrowed eyes and jaw clenched tight, that conveyed the gravity of the decision. The decision was simple: fight or flee. But as the captain turned back toward the tactical console, another voice interrupted the silence. A junior officer, voice laced with uncertainty but still filled with the remnants of hope, stepped forward. "We could try to negotiate." The captain's steely gaze silenced them instantly. Negotiation was not an option. The alien empire did not negotiate. It destroyed. It conquered. It erased. "Prepare the weapons." "We don't have the luxury of diplomacy anymore," the captain ordered, voice cold and resolute. "We have one shot at this. If we fail, the last spark of resistance will be extinguished with us. In that moment, the tension on board the ship shifted. No longer were they just survivors, now, they were warriors. Every crew member knew that whatever happened next, they were stepping into the heart of enemy territory. If they managed to reach the bunker in time, the technology it contained could give them a fighting chance, a chance to strike back. But the cost of failure would be catastrophic. They had no reinforcements, no backup, and the enemy surrounding them were far superior in strength. "Send out the signal," the captain ordered. "We're going to take that station back." The crew moved with purpose now, a strange sense of unity born of desperation and defiance. Systems hummed to life as the weapons were readied, the docking bay doors opening with a grinding sound. In the chaos, every second felt like a lifetime. As the ship's engines roared back to life, there was no time to reflect, only time to act. The station loomed ahead, now more than just a wreckage, but a battleground. The ships in orbit had begun to move, their engines lighting up as they prepared to engage. As the ship broke through the atmosphere, the sense of urgency heightened. The alien fleet's massive shadow stretched over the station like a curtain, sealing off humanity's last chance for victory. The bunker, a faint, flickering beacon on a distant, desolate world, was now a ticking time bomb, both humanity's salvation and its destruction, depending entirely on what happened next. The captain's hands gripped the helm, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the unknown ahead. One thing was clear, whatever happened, this was the moment the war would be won or lost. And there was no turning back. The ship groaned as it tore through the shattered atmosphere of the dying station, its hull shuddering under the strain of sudden acceleration. Inside, every surface vibrated with the effort of pushing beyond its limits. The once steady hum of the engines had escalated into a harsh roar, a grim reminder of how fragile the vessel's structure had become. Yet, there was no choice but to press forward. The station was their last hope, the only remaining link to the mysterious facility that could turn the tide of the war. And if they failed now, humanity's struggle for freedom would be extinguished forever. "Steady," barked a voice from the tactical console, strained but clear. The captain didn't need to look to know who had spoken. The young officer manning the controls was already gripping their seat, knuckles pale with the tension. Outside the viewport, the station appeared like a broken, decaying shell, once a bustling hub, now a graveyard. Only the faintest glow from flickering lights inside the crumbling structure told of life within. And between the crew and their target, a vast, inescapable threat loomed. The alien ships were already descending, their massive, angular forms blotting out the stars. They were everywhere, swarming like locusts, blocking every escape route, ready to destroy whatever humanity tried to rebuild. The feeling of being trapped, cornered in the vast emptiness of space, weighed on the crew like a crushing force. Enemy ships closing in fast, the communications officer reported, voice trembling. The sight of the approaching enemy fleet on their radar was enough to send a cold shiver through everyone aboard. "Engage evasive maneuvers," the captain ordered, trying to mask the fear that threatened to creep into their own voice. The crew sprang into action, shifting their focus from the station to the impending battle. But there was no illusion of victory now. Their mission was no longer about saving the station, it was about survival. The ship's engines groaned as they banked hard to the left, narrowly avoiding a blast of energy from one of the alien ships. The pulse of light from the blast illuminated the interior, casting harsh shadows across the crew's faces. But the battle was already lost. The ship's weapon systems were barely functional, unable to match the firepower of the alien fleet. The shields, weakening by the minute, flared out with each shot that landed. There was no question now, they were outmatched. A sudden explosion rocked the ship, sending everyone sprawling to the floor. The entire vessel shuddered as another burst of enemy fire hit the aft section. Sparks flew from exposed wires, smoke billowed from the walls, and the harsh, acrid scent of burning circuits filled the air. Emergency alarms blared in short, piercing bursts, adding to the chaos. "Status report," the captain shouted, voice hoarse. "Critical damage to the starboard engine," came the response, breathless. "We're losing power, and the hull integrity is failing." A cold silence fell over the crew as the grim realization hit them. The station was slipping further from their reach. The enemy was too close now, their ships everywhere, their fire too precise. There was no time left to fight with honor or strategy. They were on the edge, teetering between the possibility of a final, futile stand and a retreat into the unknown, where survival meant only a few more days of hunger and misery. Yet, despite everything, the crew continued to fight, driven not by the cold logic of survival, but by something deeper, something more primal. They had come too far to surrender now. Humanity had been beaten back to the edge of oblivion, but they were still here, still standing. The tactical officer's voice broke through the tension, cutting through the noise of alarms and shaking metal. "Captain, we have incoming enemy troops. They're boarding the station now, flooding in from every direction. We don't have time to reach the core." The news hit like a blow to the gut. The last hope for humanity was being taken from them, piece by piece. The underground facility, their final refuge, was within their grasp, but it was slipping through their fingers. It felt like the entire galaxy had turned against them, an unforgiving tide that refused to be overcome. "Prepare for hand-to-hand combat," the captain ordered, though the words felt hollow in their mouth. Every crew member knew the truth, their weapons were obsolete, and their morale was wearing thin. But the station's core held something far more valuable than any one person's survival. It held the key to fighting back, to finding the spark of rebellion that had been buried beneath years of fear and oppression. On the station's surface, fires raged where enemy fire had hit. The once dominant force of humanity had become little more than a symbol of defiance. The station's defenders, fewer than a handful of soldiers, were scattered across its crumbling halls, making their last stand. There were no glorious speeches, no rallying cries. Only the desperate hope that they could hold on just long enough to give the few remaining fighters a chance to break through the alien blockade. But it wasn't just the physical toll of the fight that was felt, it was the mental and emotional weight. Each passing moment drained more of their strength. Every explosion, every loss, took a piece of their resolve. The crew members fought not just to survive, but to reclaim something lost long ago, the belief that they could still change the future. But as the first waves of enemy troops began to storm the station, their world was breaking apart around them, and the question was no longer whether they would survive, but how much they were willing to lose before they decided to fight for something more than just existence. The final blow came when an enemy ship unleashed a powerful EMP blast, severing their communication with the outside world. The ship, once a glimmer of hope, was now a damaged hulk, drifting toward the edge of the void, like a dying animal caught in a trap. And yet, even as everything crumbled, there was no choice but to push forward, to cling to that final thread of resistance. Because if they gave in now, humanity's struggle for freedom would end not with a bang, but with a whimper. And they refused to let that happen. The air inside the ship was thick with smoke, and the flickering emergency lights cast long, erratic shadows across the walls. The tension, which had been building ever since the first explosion rattled their fragile vessel, was now unbearable. The ship's engines had failed entirely, and with it, the last hope for retreat. They were trapped, cut off from any outside help, surrounded by enemy forces on every side. Yet, amid the chaos, something unexpected happened. The captain's eyes, fixed on the control panel, suddenly widened. The distress signal from the underground facility, a beacon they had thought to be nothing more than a fleeting glimmer of hope, had suddenly come alive. The signal was clearer now, and the coordinates it provided, they were not just for a hidden bunker, but for something far more significant. Something that had been buried, forgotten, hidden in plain sight. "It's them," the captain murmured, more to themselves than anyone else. The words hung in the air like a curse, but there was no time for hesitation now. The crew turned, unsure whether to take it as bad news or a glimmer of salvation. The revelation hit hard. The station, which they had fought so desperately to protect, was not simply a base of operations. It was a repository, an archive of ancient technology, the likes of which the enemy had already begun to unlock. But that was not the full scope of what they had found. The facility contained something else, something even more dangerous, a prototype weapon, one capable of destroying entire fleets with a single blast. For years, this technology had been hidden away, lost to history. Now, the enemy was on the verge of accessing it. And if they succeeded, it would not only tip the balance of the war in their favor, it would ensure humanity's complete subjugation. The very weapon that could have saved them had become their greatest threat. The lines between ally and enemy, survival and destruction, blurred. The captain stood frozen, their mind racing. The strategic importance of the facility had been underestimated. They had thought it was just a resource, another piece of the Resistance's arsenal, but now they understood its true purpose. The ancient technology held the power to turn the tide of the entire conflict, but in the wrong hands, it would ensure the extinction of the human race. Why was this kept secret? The captain demanded, turning to the senior strategist, their voice raw with disbelief. The officer could only shake their head, the shock on their face mirroring the captain's own. It wasn't just hidden from the enemy, the strategist whispered. It was hidden from us. From the Resistance. A deep, unsettling silence descended on the room. The captain looked out the viewport, but the station outside seemed further away than ever, as though the distance between them was growing with every passing second. How had they missed this? The answer was simple: they had been blinded by desperation, by their fight for survival. All this time, they had been focused on protecting humanity's last stronghold, but the real battle was hidden beneath their feet, buried deep in the earth. The Resistance had known about the weapon, but they hadn't known how to wield it. And now, the enemy was on the brink of using it against them. For a moment, the ship's interior felt suffocating, the walls closing in as the enormity of their situation sank in. The crew, who had fought for so long with nothing more than the will to survive, were now faced with a devastating choice: do they try to take the weapon before the enemy could harness its power, or do they attempt to destroy it and risk taking everything down with them? The tactical officer spoke, voice shaky but urgent. We can't let them get their hands on it. If we do, everything's over. The fleet, the station, everything will be gone. The captain nodded, but their eyes betrayed the uncertainty that gripped their heart. This was no longer a fight for survival, it was a race against time, against an enemy that had grown stronger and more ruthless with each passing day. The consequences of failure were now clearer than ever. They didn't just face death, they faced the total annihilation of humanity's future. But in that moment, something else clicked. The realization settled like a stone in the pit of their stomach. The enemy hadn't just discovered the weapon, they had known about it all along. They had been playing a far more subtle game than anyone could have imagined. They hadn't simply destroyed colonies and fleets, they had manipulated the Resistance, pulling the strings from the shadows, ensuring that humanity would never discover the weapon's true potential until it was too late. The captain's grip tightened on the console. The true battle had always been for control of the weapon, for control of the future. Prepare to engage, the captain said, voice low and resolute. We fight for more than survival now. We fight to reclaim what was taken from us. As the crew scrambled to implement the plan, the stakes shifted. No longer was this just a desperate mission to save a station, it was a turning point in the war. Every action from this point on would determine the fate of humanity. The clock was ticking, the enemy was closing in, and there was no room for second chances. The captain looked once more at the data streaming across the screens. The coordinates were locked in, the weapon was within reach, and they had one final opportunity to seize control of the facility before it slipped beyond their grasp forever. But as they braced for what was to come, the truth was clear: this was the moment that would either save humanity or condemn it to extinction. There was no turning back. The hull of the ship groaned as it hurtled toward the station, now a war zone of flashing energy beams and crumbling structures. The enemy fleet was closer than ever, their massive ships looming like shadows, blocking every escape route. The station, humanity's last chance for survival, was no longer just a symbol of resistance, it was a battleground, a place where everything would be decided. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with fear, resolve, and the weight of what was at stake. The captain stood at the helm, their face grim, every muscle tense. The ship's systems had taken a beating, but they were still operational, barely. Every moment felt like a countdown to inevitable destruction. The station, once a beacon of hope, was now swarming with enemy forces, elite soldiers, heavily armed and ready to prevent any last-ditch attempts to reclaim it. The weapons are primed. We're locked onto the station's core, the tactical officer said, voice edged with urgency. But we need to dock, get close enough to deploy the charges. The captain nodded, eyes scanning the control panel, fingers flying over the console. Prepare the boarding team. We'll get in, disable their defenses, and take control of the facility before they can activate the weapon. We're too late for a simple approach, the senior strategist said, her voice sharp, her eyes focused. The enemy's already inside, and they're not going to let us take it back easily. A series of explosions rocked the ship, shaking everyone to their core. Red lights flashed, and the sound of hull breaches echoed through the corridors. The crew braced themselves, knowing that each moment was a gamble. The station loomed large ahead, its surface cracked and burning, a testament to the intense battle raging within. A deep, metallic voice crackled over the intercom. This is your final warning. Surrender or face total destruction. Your resistance is futile. The captain's hand tightened on the controls, their knuckles white. No surrender. No retreat. We're taking it back, no matter the cost. Without another word, they gave the order to initiate docking procedures. The ship shuddered as it moved toward the docking bay, engines firing with all their remaining power. The station's defense shields flared, but the ship's weapons struck with deadly precision, tearing through the enemy's defensive layers. The ship's final assault had begun. Inside the station, chaos reigned. The corridors were filled with smoke, sparks, and the constant sound of weapons fire. The enemy had secured the outer sections, but they hadn't anticipated the crew's relentless determination. The boarding party, led by the captain, stormed through the damaged docking bay doors, their weapons raised, adrenaline pumping. Every step was a risk. The walls seemed to close in as they advanced, each corner hiding a new threat, each room filled with hostile forces. The closer they got to the facility's core, the more desperate the situation became. The enemy was relentless, but the crew had one advantage: time. The weapon, hidden deep within the station, was their only chance to turn the tide. And they couldn't afford to waste it. Explosions rang out as enemy forces ambushed them from every direction. The sound of blaster fire filled the air, followed by the sharp thud of bodies hitting the ground. Every member of the boarding party moved with purpose, eyes locked on their objective. There was no room for fear, no room for hesitation. Each step took them closer to the facility's control room, the heart of the station, where the weapon lay waiting. The captain led the charge, taking point, their weapon firing with deadly accuracy. The halls were filled with the stench of burnt metal, blood, and the acrid smell of ionized air. The enemy fought viciously, but they were no match for the crew's resolve. One by one, they pushed deeper into the station, clearing rooms, disabling enemy forces, and cutting through obstacles. They knew they didn't have much time. The tension inside the control room was unbearable. The door slid open with a mechanical hiss, revealing the weapon, the source of humanity's potential salvation or destruction. It was a massive structure, ancient in design but powerful beyond comprehension. A shimmering core, surrounded by intricate, alien technology, pulsed with an ominous light. It was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, a weapon capable of leveling entire fleets, of wiping out entire planets. The moment they stepped inside, the air seemed to crackle with the sheer energy emanating from the weapon. The captain's eyes flickered from the core to the control panel, where enemy soldiers stood ready, prepared to defend the weapon at all costs. The air was thick with tension, every breath a gamble. "Stop them," one of the enemy commanders shouted, raising a hand to signal a defensive charge. The crew moved into position, but the sheer firepower of the enemy was overwhelming. The room erupted into chaos. Blaster bolts ricocheted off the walls, sparks flying in all directions. The captain ducked behind a console, narrowly avoiding a lethal shot. Their heart raced as they calculated their next move. "We need to disable the weapon, now," the senior strategist shouted. "We can't afford to let them activate it." The captain nodded, their gaze flicking to the control panel where a series of lights blinked ominously. The weapon was already powering up. There was no more time for subtlety. They had to act fast. In a single, decisive motion, the captain leapt from behind cover, charging toward the control panel. The enemy commander turned just in time to see them, raising a weapon in a futile attempt to stop them. The captain fired first, the shot striking true. The commander crumpled to the ground, his weapon clattering to the floor. The captain reached the control panel and slammed their fist onto the emergency shutdown button. But nothing happened. A red warning light flashed, and a robotic voice announced, "Failsafe override engaged. Deactivation impossible." "Damn it," the captain cursed, eyes frantic. The weapon was beyond their control. They were too late. Then, in the chaos, the unthinkable happened. One of the crew members, a young officer who had been with them since the beginning, stepped forward, holding a strange device in their hand. It was a small, alien artifact, one they had recovered from the station's ruins earlier in the mission. The officer had been studying it in secret, trying to understand its function. "Captain, this might work," the officer said, breathless. "It's a key. A master override. I think it can access the weapon's core." Without waiting for a response, the officer approached the control panel, inserting the artifact into a hidden slot. The room held its breath as the device hummed to life. The lights flickered, then turned a calm green. A soft, melodic sound filled the room, followed by a voice, cold, metallic, but unmistakably human. "Override accepted. Deactivation sequence initiated." The room erupted in disbelief and relief. The weapon, humanity's greatest threat, was shutting down. The tension in the air lifted, but not for long. A sudden explosion rocked the station, throwing everyone off their feet. The walls cracked, debris raining down from above. The enemy fleet had launched a final assault, and they were determined to destroy the station at all costs. The entire facility began to collapse around them, its structure failing as the self-destruct sequence initiated. "Time's up," the senior strategist shouted, scrambling to her feet. "We need to leave, now." The captain's heart raced as they turned to their crew. The mission had been a success, the weapon was neutralized, but now they were faced with an even more urgent challenge: escape. The station was falling apart. The explosion had triggered a chain reaction, and the walls were collapsing, the floors caving in, the very ground beneath them shaking. They had mere moments to escape, to make it out alive. The captain glanced at the control panel once more, the flickering lights reminding them of how close they had come to losing everything. They could hear the distant sound of enemy forces regrouping, their assault continuing. But the weapon was no longer a threat. There was no time left to savor their victory. With one last look at the crumbling facility, the captain turned and sprinted toward the docking bay. The crew followed, moving with precision, urgency. The ship was waiting, their only hope of survival. As they reached the docking bay, the ship's engines roared to life, lifting off just as the station's final explosion rocked the entire facility. The shockwave sent them hurtling into the void, the station's destruction lighting up the cosmos behind them like a final, desperate flare. For a moment, there was nothing but the silence of space. The crew, battered and bruised, stared out the viewport, knowing that they had just fought their last battle. But the war was far from over. Their struggle for freedom had only just begun. And with the weapon neutralized, they now held the key to reclaiming the future. The vast, empty silence of space was deafening. It seemed as though the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting. The remnants of the station, once a symbol of humanity's last stand, were now nothing more than glowing fragments floating in the dark void. The shockwave of its destruction had rippled through the nearby space, and the enemy fleet had retreated, its last attempt to destroy the resistance thwarted. But the victory felt hollow, like the calm after a storm. The ship, battered and scorched, coasted through the wreckage, the crew silent as they processed the gravity of their success, and the cost. The station was gone. The weapon, a threat that had loomed over them for so long, had been neutralized, but at a terrible price. Inside the bridge, the captain stood in front of the viewport, staring out into the infinite blackness. The endless stars stretched before them, indifferent to the turmoil that had just unfolded. The flickering lights of the ship's dashboard were the only sign of life in the otherwise empty space. The hum of the engines was a constant reminder that they had survived, but the journey was far from over. Beside the captain, the senior strategist was hunched over the control panel, her hands shaking as she tried to make sense of the data streaming in. The ship's systems were critically damaged, but they were functional enough to get them home, if they could find their way. She had lost comrades, friends, during the assault. Each one had been more than just a soldier, they had been family. And now they were gone, their names echoing in the silence. "This doesn't feel like a victory," she murmured, more to herself than to the captain. "We've saved humanity, but what have we lost?" The captain turned, their face hard and unreadable, but there was a flicker of emotion in their eyes. "What we've lost is everything we knew. But we still have the future. We still have hope." Hope. The word seemed almost foreign now. It had been too long since they had felt the warmth of that simple, powerful feeling. Hope was what had driven them to fight, what had kept them going when everything seemed lost. But in the quiet aftermath, with the death and destruction behind them, it felt more like a fragile dream. "We can rebuild," the captain said, their voice low but resolute. "We have the technology, the knowledge. We can take the pieces we have and create something better." The senior strategist didn't answer immediately, her mind still on the fallen comrades, still haunted by the battles they had fought and the lives they had lost. "Can we?" she asked, finally looking up. "How do we rebuild when everything we once believed in has been shattered?" The captain walked over to the tactical console, their fingers grazing the worn surface. "We rebuild by remembering why we fought," they said. "We fought for freedom. We fought for the future." The crew, gathered in the mess hall and the bridge, were still processing the enormity of the events that had unfolded. Some were still in shock, others were too exhausted to speak. But even in their exhaustion, a sense of shared purpose began to form. The resistance had been decimated, but they were alive. They had struck a blow against an overwhelming enemy, and they had something that no one could take from them, a second chance. Across the ship, the medical bay was filled with the wounded. Crew members who had barely survived the assault were being treated, their faces pale but determined. The younger officer who had discovered the master override was recovering from his injuries, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline. He had saved them all, yet he carried the weight of his choices on his shoulders. As the ship drifted further into the unknown, a new wave of uncertainty hit the crew. The war might be over, but the galaxy was still a place of mystery, rife with hidden threats and dangers. The universe they thought they understood was nothing like the one they now faced. And with each passing moment, the questions multiplied. Where had the artifact come from? Who had built it? And most importantly, what did it mean for the future of humanity? In the quiet of the ship's bridge, the captain turned to their crew one last time. "We may not have all the answers today, or tomorrow," they said, their voice steady and resolute, "but we will find them. The fight isn't over. Not by a long shot." In the distance, a bright light flared in the emptiness, a flash that quickly faded, leaving behind only a lingering sense of foreboding. It was as if the galaxy itself was sending them a message, a reminder that the stars could be both a guide and a warning. The strategist gazed at the captain, her eyes steely with determination. "We're ready for whatever comes next." But as the ship sailed deeper into the void, they all knew one thing: no matter how much they prepared, no matter how strong they became, the universe had a way of shifting, of throwing unexpected trials their way. The enemy might have been beaten back, but the war for humanity's freedom was far from over. In the silence that followed, only one thought lingered in the air: what if the true enemy had yet to reveal itself? Teaser for the future. The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of a distant hum, as if the universe itself were waiting for something to happen. And then, as the credits start to roll, a single line appears. In the darkness of space, even the smallest spark can ignite a new war. Call to action. The screen fades to a close-up of the artifact, glowing faintly in its containment chamber. Then, a voiceover, calm but filled with a quiet intensity. If you're curious to see what happens next, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and stay tuned for more. The journey is far from over, and we're just getting started. As the final words fade, the screen shifts to black, leaving the audience with a sense of anticipation. The story may have reached its current conclusion, but the future is wide open, and whatever comes next, it will not be without its challenges. Stay with us as we explore humanity's last struggle for freedom, a battle not just for survival, but for